Patrick Hicks Music Stories presents Every Grammys Ever, the 13th Annual Grammy Awards, March 16th, 1971.
The eyes and ears of the music world turn to the people who make music. They gather in Hollywood to bestow upon their fellow artists their highest honor, the Grammy Award.
We're into the next decade now, and things are starting off on a good note. The Grammys are finally live. From here on out, there's no more Best on Record specials airing months after the award ceremonies. Now we all get to find out at the same time what mistakes the Recording Academy have made. Actually, honestly, tonight is not so bad. So since the Grammys are now live, the awards are taking place for the first time ever in only one location. This time it's Los Angeles at the Hollywood Palladium, and the host is the singer Andy Williams in his first of several hosting gigs. Now, other than being live, we saw some other historic firsts on the night. First of all, we finally see a nomination for Jimi Hendrix. Jimi had died in September 1970, so he didn't get a nomination in his lifetime. And even tonight, the only nomination he gets is for Best Contemporary Instrumental Performance. But he is nominated for his iconic rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock. I mean, is there a more important instrumental of the decade? Obviously, he is going to win. No, he lost. And you're never going to believe who he lost to: Henry Mancini, for the album Theme from Z and Other Film Music. Henry Mancini. Through the course of making this series, he has become my arch nemesis. And that was it. That was all Jimi got. And I think his 0-for-1 record at the Grammys is pretty shameful. One very important figure, although not a musical one, who did get a win at the 13th Annual Grammys: Martin Luther King. He won a posthumous Best Spoken Word Grammy for Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam. And it's a good thing that he won, because he'd already lost twice in this category before, including for the I Had a Dream speech, which lost to the poet Rod McEwen. Okay, the depressing stuff is out of the way. Now let's talk about the big awards. Best New Artist tonight goes to the Carpenters, who beat out the Partridge Family and Elton John. The Carpenters had a big night. They received 5 nominations, which is tied with Simon & Garfunkel for the most nominations on the night, including a nomination in all 4 big categories. And kind of strangely, the nominations in both the Song of the Year and Record of the Year categories were exactly the same, except there was a different Carpenters song nominated in each category. For Record of the Year, it was They Long to Be Close to You, and for Song of the Year, it was We've Only Just Begun. But the other 4 nominees in both categories were exactly the same, and they were James Taylor's Fire and Rain, Everything is Beautiful by the country singer Ray Stevens, Let It Be by the Beatles, and Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon & Garfunkel. And Bridge Over Troubled Water wins the Grammy in both categories.
I'm sailing right behind, like a bridge over troubled water.
Now, the Beatles, who just lost their last chance to win Song or Record of the Year, they did receive 1 Grammy that night. It was for Best Original Score written for a motion picture or television special for Let It Be. The award was given to them by, of all people, John Wayne,
John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, or Let It Be.
and Paul McCartney actually showed up to receive the award, which was a big surprise, and it was a big get for the first live Grammys.
Thank you. Good night.
And now for the nominees for Album of the Year. The Carpenters are nominated for their album Close to You, and their fellow Best New Artist nominee Elton John is nominated for Elton John. Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young get another nomination for Deja Vu. The band Chicago is nominated for Chicago. James Taylor is nominated for his album Sweet Baby James. And Simon & Garfunkel get their second Album of the Year nomination for Bridge Over Troubled Water. But before we get to the winner, let's talk about some albums that came out in 1970 that were not nominated. First of all, you've got the first 2 Black Sabbath records, Black Sabbath and Paranoid, which I get they were not going to nominate. I mean, these weren't even critically successful, let alone that commercially successful. But for the next couple decades, we're going to be tracking the disrespect of heavy metal at the Grammys, so let's start here. And if there's any genre more disrespected by the Grammys than heavy metal, it's punk rock, so let's talk about the Stooges. The godfathers of punk released their second album, Funhouse, in 1970. Then we've got Cosmo's Factory by Creedence Clearwater Revival. This is Creedence's 5th album, and they are still nominationless at the Grammys. They never win one in their short but important career. And this was a really successful album. It spent 9 weeks at #1 on the Billboard charts. It had 6 hit singles, and they were all top 5 singles. It sold millions of copies. It's kind of inexplicable that this is not recognized for anything. Miles Davis's masterpiece, Bitches Brew, Santana's Abraxas, Curtis Mayfield's Curtis, and the Grateful Dead, who we haven't actually talked about on the channel yet, although I did use a picture of them when they were the Warlocks, but they put out 2 records, both American Beauty and Working Man's Dead this year. If there ever was a year that they were going to get a Grammy nomination, you would think it might be 1970, but they don't. In fact, they have 0 wins and 0 nominations for their entire career. And the Album of the Year Grammy goes to Bridge Over Troubled Water. Simon and Garfunkel really owned this night in a historic way. They became the first group to win Song of the Year, Record of the Year, and Album of the Year on the same night. They were the first group to win 5 Grammys in a single night, a record that has been tied a couple times but only beaten once. And separate from Simon and Garfunkel, Paul Simon did even better since he was the songwriter of Bridge Over Troubled Water and Garfunkel wasn't. He picked up 2 extra Grammys, the Song of the Year Award and a Best Arrangement Award, and his 7 Grammys were a record that held for over a decade and is still the 3rd most in a single night of all time. This is an absolute classic album. I think it's safe to say that the first live Grammys and the first Grammys awarding music of the 1970s is a success. Now let's see how long they can stay in this groove. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time for the 14th Annual Grammys in 1972.
No, it isn't strange after changes upon changes. We are more or less the same. After changes, we are more